The hall was enormous, a place where the walls seemed to hold every note ever played, and the ceiling rose high, almost brushing the clouds. The audience was buzzing with anticipation. This was not just any music competition, it was a gathering of the most talented pianists in the country. People had come from far and wide, drawn by the promise of breathtaking performances and the chance to witness something extraordinary. The chairs were lined neatly, the lights carefully arranged, and the air carried a mixture of excitement, tension, and expectation among the crowd. Whispers floated through the room like invisible threads. Everyone was talking about the young blind girl who was about to perform. Some were skeptical, some curious, and some were downright dismissive. After all, it wasn't every day that a blind child stood on the same stage as some of the most accomplished musicians alive. There were murmurs, almost like small waves crashing softly in the background, questioning if she truly had what it took. A few of the audience members exchanged doubtful glances. Could she possibly match the skill and precision of the other contestants? Could someone who had never seen the piano properly, who had never seen the sheet music in the way others had, actually deliver a performance that would leave people stunned? The room was heavy with these questions, and the tension was almost tangible. The girl moved quietly toward the piano. Every step was careful, deliberate, as if she had practiced this walk 1,000 times. The floor felt smooth beneath her feet, and her fingers brushed lightly against the polished wood of the piano as she approached. She didn't need to look. She knew where every key was, and she had memorized every inch of this instrument as though it were a part of her own body. The audience held its breath as she settled on the bench. She took a moment, closed her eyes, and exhaled slowly. There was a calmness about her that contrasted sharply with the nervous energy surrounding her. She didn't fidget, she didn't hesitate, and she didn't seem even the slightest bit intimidated by the large crowd that had come to watch Dot at that moment. The world-famous pianist entered the hall. He was known far and wide, a man whose name alone carried weight in music circles. When he walked in, people automatically turned to see him. He moved with the confidence of someone used to being admired, someone accustomed to being at the center of attention wherever he went. His gaze swept over the audience, then settled on the young girl at the piano. There was a slight smirk on his face, a hint of superiority that seemed almost natural to him. He had seen countless musicians, countless prodigies, and yet here was a blind child attempting to play at a level that he had long considered untouchable. He didn't hide his disdain. In fact, he didn't even try. Leaning casually against the edge of the stage, he spoke loud enough for several people near the front to hear. "Do you really think she can play? Let's see if she even hits the right keys." His voice carried a sharp edge, a mixture of mockery and disbelief. The audience shifted uncomfortably. Some gasped. Others looked away, unsure whether to laugh, to scold, or simply to remain silent. The room was thick with tension. The girl, however, didn't flinch. She didn't respond. She simply closed her eyes a little tighter, took a deep breath, and let the world around her fade. Dot. It was as if she had entered a place where nothing else existed except the piano. Her hands hovered above the keys, and for a moment the room seemed to hold its collective breath. The whispers died down, the clinking of chairs and shuffling of papers seemed to vanish, and all that remained was the faint scent of polished wood and anticipation. She wasn't just preparing to play a piece of music. She was preparing to tell a story, to speak a language that went beyond words. To connect with people in a way that the eyes alone could never achieve. The famous pianist leaned forward slightly, as if to better witness what he expected to be a disaster. He had never been wrong before, and in his mind this would be no exception. He expected hesitation, awkward pauses, mistakes, anything that would confirm his belief that she was out of her depth. But what happened next would shatter those expectations completely. She pressed her first note, and it rang out clear and strong. The sound was pure, almost delicate, but it carried a depth that seemed far beyond her age. It was like a single droplet of water falling into a still pond, and yet that droplet created ripples that spread across the entire hall. The audience was caught off guard. Even the pianist, who had seen and heard it all, froze. The note was so perfect, so full of feeling. that it seemed impossible to come from someone who had been doubted, someone who had been underestimated from the very start. There was a strange stillness that followed, almost as if time had slowed down for a heartbeat. Everyone in the audience leaned in, not wanting to miss a single sound. The girl's fingers moved gracefully, confidently, as she played the next note and then the next. The music didn't just flow. It soared. It told a story that the eyes could not see but the heart could understand. It carried sadness and joy, struggle and triumph, all wrapped in the language of sound. She was no longer just a blind girl at the piano. She was a storyteller, a magician turning each key into a word, each chord into a sentence, each melody into a paragraph of a tale that captivated everyone listening. The world-famous pianist's smirk faded. He had expected mistakes, but there were none. He had expected hesitance, but there was none. He had expected weakness, but what he saw was strength beyond his imagination. His arms, once crossed confidently over his chest, now hung slightly at his sides. His eyes, which had often looked down on others, were wide with disbelief. He realized, perhaps for the first time in his life, that he had misjudged someone. And the misjudgment wasn't minor, it was monumental. The audience was equally mesmerized. People who had been whispering, laughing, or even doubting her now sat in complete silence, their attention fully captured by the music. Some felt tears prick their eyes, moved by the beauty and emotion flowing from the piano. Others felt a shiver run down their spine, a physical reaction to something beyond words. The hall, once filled with chatter and anticipation, now held a silence so deep that it seemed almost sacred. And through it all, the girl played on. She didn't look at the pianist, she didn't look at the audience, and she didn't even glance at the sheet music. She was fully immersed, completely present in the moment, and utterly fearless. The music came from her heart, and it touched everyone in the room. It was raw, honest, and real, qualities that could not be faked, qualities that no one could teach. It was a talent that demanded respect, not just for skill, but for courage and authenticity. For the first time, people began to understand that talent wasn't about what you could see, or how much applause you received, or even how famous you were. Talent was about connection, about honesty, about being brave enough to share a part of yourself that no one else could replicate. And this girl, so often underestimated, had done exactly that. She had taken the stage, faced ridicule, and transformed it into an experience that no one would ever forget. Even as the first part of her performance came to an end, the atmosphere remained charged. The pianist, who had entered the hall with an air of arrogance, now felt something unfamiliar: humility. He realized that brilliance could come from the most unexpected places, that assumptions could be shattered by a single note, and that true talent often existed where the world least expected it. The whispers that had floated through the room earlier had vanished, replaced by awe, respect, and anticipation for what would come next. It was in that silence, after just a few notes, that the world began to see her not as a blind girl, but as a musician, an artist, and a storyteller who had the power to move hearts, change minds, and leave a mark on everyone who had the privilege to listen. And though the first note had already silenced the entire world, it was clear that this was only the beginning of something extraordinary. As the first few notes faded into the air, a strange calm settled over the hall. The audience, who had been filled with doubt just moments ago, now sat completely still. It was as if time itself had paused to listen, to feel, and to understand the story that was unfolding through the piano. Every corner of the room, from the front rows to the farthest balcony, was absorbed in the music, and every heartbeat seemed to sync with the rhythm she created. The girl's fingers moved with confidence and precision, each key pressed with purpose, each chord striking with emotion that words could never fully capture. The world-famous pianist, who had been leaning forward skeptically, now sat in stunned silence. His eyes followed every movement of her hands, his mind struggling to comprehend what he was hearing. He had never seen such focus, such skill, and such emotion combined in one performance. He was used to being the center of attention, used to commanding admiration and respect with his talent alone. And yet, here was a young blind girl, sitting quietly at the piano, completely unassuming, yet commanding the room with music that spoke louder than any words ever could. The piece she was playing seemed simple at first. It was gentle and soft, almost hesitant, but there was a depth to it that revealed something far more complex. It wasn't just a song. It was a story of life, of struggle, of hope. The audience could feel it in their hearts. Some of the people in the room had tears brimming in their eyes, though they tried to hide them. Others had their hands clenched, gripping their seats, moved by a combination of awe and emotion that left them speechless. Everyone could feel the honesty of the music. There was no pretense, no attempt to impress with flashy techniques or unnecessary complexity. Every note was deliberate, every pause meaningful, and every chord resonated with feeling. The girl's eyes remained closed, her face calm, almost serene. She didn't need to see the audience or the grand hall around her. She didn't need to measure herself against the other competitors or the world-famous pianist sitting nearby. She was completely immersed in the music. It flowed through her as naturally as breathing, guided by years of practice, determination, and an inner connection that went beyond mere technique. She had spent countless hours alone at the piano, learning not just how to play, but how to make the piano speak, how to make it reflect her heart, her emotions, her soul. And now, all of that work, all of that effort was unfolding in real time, transforming the room and everyone in it. The famous pianist leaned back slightly, his arms resting limply at his sides. He had been challenged many times in his life. Many times he had been pushed to prove himself, yet nothing had prepared him for this. He realized, slowly but unmistakably, that he had been wrong. He had underestimated her. He had assumed that blindness was a limitation, that her talent could not match hers or anyone else's on this stage. And now he understood that true talent is not limited by what we can see or by what society expects. True talent exists in the heart and mind, in the courage to face the world and share what is within, regardless of obstacles. Every note the girl played seemed to touch someone in the audience personally. Some remembered their childhood dreams, others thought of loved ones they had lost, and some felt a sense of inspiration they had not felt in years. It was impossible not to feel something. Even those who had been critical or doubtful before now had their opinions replaced with respect, admiration, and wonder. The hall was completely silent, yet it was not empty of sound. There was music, yes, but there was also emotion, connection, and understanding. Every person listening could feel it differently, yet they all felt it the same powerful, undeniable, and unforgettable as she continued. Her hands moved faster, yet the music never lost its clarity. She navigated complex sequences with apparent ease, her fingers gliding over the keys as though they had a life of their own. She played with a precision and emotion that was rare even among the most skilled pianists. There were crescendos that made the audience's hearts race and delicate whispers of notes that made them lean in, as if trying not to disturb the magic in the air. The entire room was entranced, lost in a world created entirely by the music. Flowing from her hands, some people in the audience could feel the tension building with every measure. They could sense the story unfolding, the struggle, the determination, the courage, and the triumph. It was a story of a young girl who refused to be defined by her limitations, a girl who had faced ridicule and doubt and yet had the strength to stand tall and shine. Her performance was no longer just about music. It was about life itself, about the resilience of the human spirit, and about the power of courage and talent combined. The famous pianist could no longer hide the impact of what he was witnessing. He had expected a performance that would be weak, maybe even clumsy. Instead, he was seeing brilliance. He realized that he had been hasty in judging her, hasty in assuming that blindness was a limitation or that youth meant inexperience. Every note she played reminded him that he too had been vulnerable once. That talent comes in all forms, and that the true measure of a musician is not how many accolades they have, but how deeply they can touch the hearts of others. He watched as the girl's fingers danced across the piano keys. There was a rhythm, a flow, and a passion in her playing that could not be taught. It came from within her, from a place of honesty and emotion. Every note told a story, and every story she told carried pieces of herself, pieces of her struggles and triumphs, pieces of her heart. The audience could feel it, The pianist could feel it, and she didn't even need to see them to know. She was reaching them. There was something almost magical about the way she played. It was as if the piano and the girl were one, moving together in perfect harmony. The music wasn't just something people listened to. It was something they felt, something that made them remember what it felt like to be fully alive, to be fully present in a moment. Some in the audience held their breath at certain notes, others closed their eyes to take in the music fully, and many had tears streaming down their faces. No one dared to speak, to move, to break the spell. It was as though the music had suspended reality, and for those few minutes, nothing else mattered. The girl's focus was incredible. She didn't glance at the pianist, she didn't look at the judges, and she didn't care about the audience. She was fully present, fully immersed, and fully herself. There was a bravery in that, a courage that went beyond playing music. She had faced skepticism and even insult, and she had ignored it. She had let the music speak, and it spoke louder than any criticism ever could. Her determination was as clear as the notes she played, and it shone through in every chord, every trill, every subtle shift in melody. The famous pianist shifted in his seat, his mind racing. He realized that this young girl had something he had long forgotten, something that went beyond training, beyond fame and beyond skill. She had heart. She had courage. She had a gift that couldn't be measured by medals or applause, only by the way it made people feel. He felt humbled, almost ashamed that he had ever doubted her. He understood now that talent and genius are not always visible to the eye, and that sometimes the most extraordinary abilities exist where we least expect them. The hall remained silent except for the music, but it was a silence filled with awe, respect, and wonder. People were leaning forward in their seats, unable to look away or focus on anything else. Every note carried a weight, a message, and a story. It wasn't just a performance. It was a revelation. The girl was showing everyone that limitations exist only in the mind, that courage and dedication can defy expectations, and that true brilliance is not always obvious until it is revealed in action. As the piece continued, the audience's emotions grew even stronger. Some laughed softly at the joy in certain passages, some wiped tears from their eyes, and some felt chills run down their spines. The music connected with each person differently, yet everyone felt the same deep respect for the young musician. She wasn't just playing notes. She was touching hearts, changing minds, and reminding everyone of the beauty that exists when someone dares to be themselves fully. The famous pianist finally leaned forward, his eyes focused entirely on her hands. He realized that she had already achieved something that many of his peers had never done. She had captured the audience completely, commanded respect, and reminded everyone of the raw power of true music. It wasn't arrogance or fame that made her remarkable. It was her honesty, her courage, and her ability to let the music flow from her heart. As part two of her performance reached its climax, the audience sat on the edge of their seats. Every chord resonated through the hall, every note told a story, and every pause was filled with emotion. The girl's music had become a language everyone could understand, a language without words, without sight, without prejudice, just pure emotion and human connection. For a young blind girl, this was her moment, and she had claimed it with all the power of her talent and all the courage of her heart. Even the world-famous pianist sat silently, humbled and speechless. He had come expecting to witness doubt, to see imperfection, and perhaps even to witness failure. Instead, he had witnessed brilliance, grace, courage, and heart. He realized that some lessons could not be learned from books, from competitions, or from fame. They could only be learned. The music had reached a point where it felt almost alive. Every note the girl played seemed to carry a heartbeat, a pulse that traveled through the entire hall. The audience, who had once been skeptical or doubtful, now felt completely connected. Some were leaning forward, eyes wide, hearts pounding, completely caught in the magic of the moment. Others had tears quietly running down their cheeks, unable to hide the deep emotional pull of what they were hearing. The room was no longer just a concert hall. It had transformed into a space of pure emotion, a place where everyone's hearts were open, and where every listener felt the music in their own way. The world-famous pianist, who had begun the evening with an air of superiority, now sat frozen in his seat. His arms, once confidently crossed over his chest, now rested limply at his sides. His face was calm, but his mind was a whirlwind. He had seen countless musicians in his lifetime, children, adults, prodigies, students, and seasoned professionals, but he had never witnessed anything like this. The young girl, blind and unassuming, had captured the attention of the entire hall, including him. Each note she played seemed to strip away layers of doubt, arrogance, and expectation. He realized that she wasn't just performing. She was transforming everyone who heard her, including him. Her hands moved over the piano keys with a speed and precision that was breathtaking. She hit every note perfectly, yet it wasn't just about accuracy. There was something more, a depth of feeling, an emotional resonance that went beyond mere technical skill. It was as if the music itself had become a language, one that transcended words, sight, and even logic. She told a story with every chord, every trill, every pause. The audience could feel the journey she was taking them on, moments of sadness, moments of hope, moments of triumph, and moments of reflection. The famous pianist's eyes never left her hands. He noticed the way she played each note with intent, the subtle movements of her fingers, the gentle shift of her body as she leaned into the music. There was a confidence in her movements, a control that seemed impossible for someone her age and experience. And yet there was also vulnerability, a kind of honesty that made her performance feel raw, real, and incredibly human. He realized that this was the key difference between talent and greatness. Many could play the notes perfectly, but very few could make the audience feel the music in their bones. She was one of those rare few. The piece was growing more complex now, weaving between gentle, delicate passages and powerful, intense crescendos. The contrast made every moment more gripping, every chord more impactful. The audience could feel the tension building and releasing with each measure, as if they were riding a wave of emotion that carried them effortlessly along with the music. Some people leaned back in their seats, eyes closed, letting the sound wash over them. Others clutched their hands together, almost afraid to breathe. So absorbed were they in the story unfolding before them. It wasn't just the audience who was affected. The famous pianist felt something shift inside him as well. He had come prepared to judge, to evaluate, and perhaps even to criticize. Instead, he was humbled. He realized how wrong he had been to assume anything about her based on her appearance, her age, or her disability. His mind replayed his earlier words, the sneer he had given, and the doubt he had projected. There was a sinking feeling in his chest, a mix of regret and awe. He understood now that she had faced far more than any of the others on stage. She had faced skepticism, insult, and doubt, and she had responded not with words but with music. And in doing so, she had proven her worth in a way that could not be denied or ignored. The audience began to sense the intensity of what was happening on stage. They could see the transformation not just in the music, but in the room itself. The energy had shifted from curiosity and doubt to complete respect and admiration. People who had been whispering or fidgeting at the beginning were now completely still, mesmerized by the performance. Every note resonated, every pause held meaning, and every chord seemed to echo the emotions of everyone listening. The hall felt alive with a collective heartbeat, all centered on the young girl at the piano. As she continued, she began to play with even more passion. Her movements became more expressive, more animated, yet controlled. There were moments when the music swelled and filled the room, moments when it softened and whispered, almost as if speaking directly to each listener. The famous pianist could no longer look away. He watched, spellbound, as she poured her entire being into the music. It was impossible not to feel her courage, her determination, and her brilliance. He realized that she had something that could never be taught, an innate ability to communicate. Through music, to touch people's hearts, and to command attention not through fame or showmanship, but through honesty and soul. The hall was completely silent except for the piano. The sound traveled through every corner, every seat, and every listener. It was impossible to remain detached or indifferent. The music demanded attention, demanded respect, and demanded emotional engagement. The audience could feel the tension, the release, the highs and the lows as though they were living the story themselves. Each person listening had their own reaction, their own memories and emotions stirred by the music, yet all were united in admiration for the performer. The famous pianist's expression slowly changed from skepticism to amazement. He had been so certain that he would be the one to shine, the one to impress the crowd. Yet here was a young blind girl doing what he had always believed to be impossible. He realized that his pride had blinded him, that his arrogance had prevented him from seeing true talent when it was right in front of him. And now, as he watched her, he felt humbled in a way that he had never experienced before. The music was teaching him a lesson he would never forget, that greatness is not measured by fame, recognition, or accolades, but by the ability to touch lives and move hearts. The girl's fingers moved with an almost magical grace, her hands seeming to fly across the keys without a single misstep. Each chord resonated with clarity and emotion, each note carrying a piece of her heart. She had mastered not just the mechanics of the piano, but the very essence of music itself. The audience could sense it. Some whispered softly to each other, unable to contain their amazement. Others sat silently, eyes closed, letting the music wash over them completely. It was an experience that felt intimate yet universal, a connection that reached beyond sight, age, or status. The famous pianist felt a mix of awe and shame. He had been so sure of himself, so certain that he could judge, critique, and dominate the room with his own talent. And yet here he was, humbled by someone he had dismissed, someone he had underestimated from the very beginning. He realized that the young girl's talent was not just technical skill, it was courage, authenticity, and heart. It was an ability to rise above doubt, to face judgment with calm determination, and to speak through music in a way that could not be ignored. As the piece approached its climax, the music grew even more intense. The girl's fingers moved with incredible speed and precision, yet each note was perfectly clear. The energy in the hall was palpable, a mix of excitement, awe, and admiration. The audience felt the tension building with every chord, the emotions rising and falling with the rhythm of the performance. It was as if the piano itself were alive, responding to her touch and echoing the feelings of everyone listening. The famous pianist could hardly believe what he was seeing and hearing. He had seen many talented musicians, but rarely had he witnessed someone who could command the room so completely with music alone. He felt humbled, inspired, and most of all, grateful to have the opportunity to witness such brilliance. He realized that this young girl had achieved something far greater than he ever could have imagined. She had captured the hearts of everyone in the hall, including him, and had proven that true talent knows no limits. As the last chords of the piece approached, the girl played with a sense of completion, of finality. The music swelled and then softened, fading into silence. The audience remained still for a moment, as if afraid to break the spell. Then slowly, the first whispers of admiration began to rise, followed by clapping, then cheers, then a full standing ovation. It was not just a polite gesture, it was a genuine, heartfelt response to a performance that had touched everyone present. The famous pianist remained seated for a moment, absorbing what had just happened. He had been proven wrong, humbled, and inspired all at once. He realized that this young blind girl had accomplished something truly extraordinary. She had faced doubt, insult, and skepticism, yet she had risen above it all with courage, determination, and pure talent. She had reminded everyone in the room, including him, that greatness is not about arrogance or fame, but about heart, authenticity, and the ability to connect with others. By the end of her performance, it was clear that she had left an unforgettable mark. The audience would remember this moment for the rest of their lives. And the famous pianist, who had once dismissed her, now understood the true power of music, courage, and talent. He knew that he had witnessed something rare, something beautiful, and something that would inspire him forever. The last note hung in the air, vibrating softly, almost like a gentle whisper that refused to leave. For a few heartbeats, there was complete silence. It was not awkward silence or empty silence. It was the kind of silence that carries awe, respect, and the weight of a moment that will never be forgotten. Every single person in the hall felt it. The music had left a mark deep inside their hearts, a feeling that words could not capture. Even those who had doubted her from the start were unable to look away or hide their astonishment. The young girl had taken them all on a journey, and they were still traveling. Even after the music had stopped, the audience sat frozen for a moment, trying to process what they had just witnessed. Some blinked rapidly, as if they could somehow catch and hold the magic that had passed through the room. Others clasped their hands together, gripping them so tightly it seemed they were afraid to let go. Tears glistened on the cheeks of many, and quiet gasps of amazement spread like ripples in water. It was impossible to ignore the transformation that had occurred in the hall. People had come expecting to be entertained, perhaps to see talent on display, but they had received something far greater. They had seen courage, resilience, and brilliance manifest in a way that transcended the ordinary. The famous pianist, who had once looked down on her, was no exception. He sat motionless, his eyes wide and reflective. His chest rose and fell slowly, almost as if he were catching his breath from the realization of what had just happened. Pride, which had always defined him, had been replaced with humility. He had entered the hall confident and dismissive, expecting to be impressed by himself and the performers, but the young girl had appended all of that. In a few minutes, she had shattered every preconception he had held and left him questioning everything he thought he knew about talent, skill, and even life itself. He rose slowly from his seat, unsure of what to do or say. Words felt inadequate in the face of what had just unfolded. The applause had begun, rising in volume, shaking the walls of the hall. People stood, cheering, whistling, and clapping for what felt like an eternity. The young girl remained seated at the piano, her eyes closed, as if she were only now becoming aware that her performance had ended. She had played not for recognition or praise, but because it was the only way she knew to express herself, the only way to communicate what words could never capture. Step by step, people began to approach the stage, some slowly, some quickly, to offer congratulations, to shake her hand, or simply to witness her in person. They did not see a blind girl. They saw an artist, a storyteller, and someone whose courage had inspired them all. The world-famous pianist approached last, his steps deliberate, almost cautious. He wanted to acknowledge her, but he also wanted to honor what she had created, not diminish it with his own presence. As he came closer, he realized that this was not a moment for ego or competition. This was a moment to recognize talent, heart, and human connection. When he finally stood beside her, he looked down at her with an expression he had never imagined he would wear, one of genuine respect and admiration. His voice was quiet but firm, carrying a sincerity that surprised even him. "I misjudged you," he said. "I didn't understand your ability. I didn't understand your strength. I was wrong, and I want you to know that." There was no arrogance, no ego, only humility. For him, it was a lesson he would carry forever, a reminder that talent cannot be measured by appearance, fame, or assumptions. The girl opened her eyes and gave a small smile. She did not gloat, nor did she boast. She had no need to. Her performance had spoken louder than any words ever could. She had proven her worth, silenced doubt, and inspired everyone in the hall without a single gesture of pride. She simply nodded, acknowledging the pianist's words, and then turned her attention to the audience once more. Every clap, every cheer, every tearful look reinforced what she had always known deep inside, that talent combined with courage is unstoppable. Journalists and photographers, who had been scribbling notes and taking pictures throughout the performance, now crowded closer to capture the moment. They wanted to tell the world about what had just happened, to show everyone the blind girl who had stunned a world-famous pianist and moved hundreds with her music. Reports would later describe her as extraordinary, inspiring, and unforgettable. And yet, despite all the attention and praise, she remained humble, focusing on the music itself and the connection she had made with everyone in the room. It was then that something remarkable happened. The audience began to rise as one, standing in admiration, not just for her talent, but for her courage. They had witnessed a transformation, not just in the music, but in themselves. Doubt and judgment melted away, replaced with inspiration and respect. Some stood silently, overcome with emotion. Others clapped so loudly it felt as though the building itself would shake. In that moment, the young girl was no longer just a performer. She was a symbol of perseverance, strength, and the human spirit's ability to rise above every challenge. The famous pianist remained standing nearby, watching the reactions of the audience. He saw the awe in their faces, the tears, the smiles, the shaking heads of disbelief. And he realized that he had witnessed something far greater than a remarkable performance. He had witnessed the power of courage, of determination, and of heart. She had shown that brilliance is not always obvious, and that sometimes the most extraordinary talent can come from the most unexpected places. He understood finally that humility and respect are as important as skill and fame, and that true greatness is measured not by how many people know your name, but by the impact you have on the world around you. As the applause continued, the girl slowly rose from the piano bench. She did not rush. She did not demand attention. She simply walked to the front of the stage, letting the applause wash over her. She had worked for this moment her entire life, but she did not let it change her. She had faced ridicule, doubt, and even insult, yet she had performed with honesty and heart. And now, standing in front of hundreds of people, she felt a quiet sense of triumph. Not for herself, but for the power of music to connect, to heal, and to inspire. The hall gradually calmed as the cheers settled into a warm, lingering silence. The audience could still feel the music, still feel the courage and determination that had carried her through the performance. Even as people began to leave, the memory of her playing remained, echoing in their hearts long after the hall was empty. Conversations would revolve around this moment for days, weeks, and years to come. People would remember the blind girl who had played the piano with such mastery that even a world-famous pianist had been silenced and humbled. Backstage, the young girl quietly packed her sheet music and prepared to leave. She was approached by judges, teachers, and audience members alike, all offering congratulations, praise, and admiration. She accepted each word graciously, smiling softly, her demeanor calm and composed. She had learned long ago that true achievement does not require boasting. It is felt in the hearts of others, in the moments when someone's soul is moved, and in the quiet realization that effort, courage, and heart can overcome any obstacle. The famous pianist approached her once more, this time extending his hand in respect and acknowledgement. "You have taught me something tonight," he said. "Something I will never forget. Talent is not just what you see, but what you feel, and you have more of it than I could ever imagine." His words were sincere, carrying a depth of emotion that matched the music she had just played. She smiled and nodded, feeling a sense of closure, understanding, and shared respect. As she left the stage, people turned to look after her, whispering in awe and admiration. It was clear that this was not just a performance. It was an event, a memory, and an inspiration that would stay with everyone present. For the young girl, it was a moment of triumph, not just because she had played flawlessly, but because she had faced the world's doubt and judgment with courage and heart. She had shown that limitations are often only in the mind, and that true brilliance shines through honesty, effort, and determination. The world-famous pianist remained on the stage a moment longer, reflecting on the evening. He understood now that greatness is not about ego, fame, or recognition. It is about humility, courage, and the ability to touch others with your gift. He had been humbled, inspired, and reminded of the very reason he had fallen in love with music in the first place. It was not for applause or accolades, but for connection, the power to communicate, inspire, and change lives through the beauty of sound. The audience gradually began to leave, many still whispering to one another about what they had witnessed. And as they filed out, the memory of the young blind girl's performance lingered in the air, like the fading echo of a perfect chord. It was a story they would tell for years, a moment that would inspire countless people, a reminder that courage, determination, and talent are forces that can never be underestimated. The young girl, walking quietly through the backstage doors, felt a quiet joy in her heart. She had faced doubt, insult, and expectation, and she had emerged victorious not just in performance but in spirit. She had proven, in the most beautiful way possible, that true talent, courage, and heart cannot be denied. And for everyone who had been present, it was a lesson they would carve